There you go. All right, let's jump into this first story from timcast.com. Putin has already attempted to detonate a nuke. Was stopped by sabotage, insider says. Russian expert believes senior level officials are working against Putin to prevent nuclear detonations in Ukraine. A Moscow insider has claimed that Russian President Vladimir Putin recently attempted to detonate a nuclear weapon, but that his efforts were sabotaged by top brass at the Kremlin. The report published at the Mirror also says unspecified technical issues could account for the failure of Russian nukes in recent weeks. Unspecified. Well, of course, this could only mean one thing. Aliens. Because that's the conspiracy theory that whenever, you know, like the aliens shut down the nukes. This is actually, people actually talk about. I don't know. I don't know why they think that's true. I mentioned this briefly before the show. I said I think it absolves humanity of responsibility, and that's why people want to believe it. The reality is, I'll put it this way. Yo, world leaders, they're not above you. If you sit down if you're in a bar, you wouldn't even realize you're talking to someone because people are just people. You go into the courts, you meet politicians, you meet enough people, you meet people who are wealthy and own things, and you realize everybody sort of acts the exact same way. Obviously, people know different things. People have access to different things. But what I'm trying to say here with this is when your neighbor got angry at you over some petty BS, that same level of emotion can happen with someone like Putin, who's got his finger over the button.
Do you think this story is true, Doug?
I really don't buy it. I don't have any idea what Putin would have to advantage himself by detonating a nuke. I mean, obviously, he's talking. I'm no defender of Putin. I actually designed strategies to defend our allies in Eastern and Northern Europe against him. I don't want him in the Baltic nations. I don't want him in Poland, etc. But he needs to talk about nukes as a deterrence against the U.S. and NATO. Obviously, a red line for him was 2014, of course, when a new government came in that was pro-West, pro-EU, pro-NATO. We've seen a similar situation in 2008, of course, with Georgia. Georgia was bucking real hard and working real hard to get NATO membership, and Vladimir Putin's like, oh, no, you're not. So he swept in Abkhazia, South Ossetia in Georgia and waged that war, achieved his objectives, had a buffer zone, and then stopped. This, I have to say, I'm pleasantly surprised by the actions of the Ukrainian armed forces. Just who would have known that they would be able to stop Vladimir Putin and actually have a counteroffensive? Yeah,
well, they were training since 2014. U.S. Special Operations were down there training every single one of them and preparing the landscape. And when you're an invading army, you don't have the advantage. They have home territory, and they have all the latest and greatest U.S. technology. Now, I actually read this article, and this article's all over the place. Number one, the Mirror doesn't have the best reputation. And they say in the article, quote, insider claims the launch was not done because of technical failure or by reluctant military chiefs. So again, who's the source? Who's telling you these stories? And number two, you can't even get the story correct. Which one is it?
The Mirror is NewsGuard certified, Luke. What do you mean? NewsGuard says it's good.
And another thing to understand here, there is a chain of command specifically with Russia when it comes to launching nuclear weapons that people should know about, because it's not just Vladimir Putin pressing his finger on the button. He also, in Russia, they also have something that's sort of similar like the nuclear football, but they have a briefcase that essentially notifies the general staff. The general staff have access to the launch codes. Then, after the general staff get the launch codes, they could give it to individual weapons commanders. Then they, of course, execute the procedure. Then they send the nuke. So that's the protocol. That's the chain of command that they have in Russia, which I think is also important to understand here. It's not just one guy pressing the button. And there are ways that the chain of command, the general staff, or the individual commanders could say, no, this is crazy. So, and that's a likely scenario here.
Okay, but how about this? Putin leaked the story on purpose to scare people in the West to think that he's actively prepared and wants to use nukes. You know what I mean? Like saber rattle to the extreme degree.
Yeah, but there is merit to that. We listen to any of his major speeches, and usually something about nukes comes up, or through a proxy of his. And so, yes, that's his deterrent model. Much as Saddam Hussein, you know, I was part of Desert Storm liberating Kuwait, you know, a war for energy, by the way, and we knew that. But then Saddam Hussein got rid of his chemical biological weapons, didn't tell the West, but he kept talking about he's going to use them against us as a deterrent. So I do believe that's a possibility. Putin wants us to know that if we take it to the next level, there's a high danger that it's going to escalate.